Oh my God, it's already time for Inside Coverage. I'm stoked for this week. Frank Schwab, Charles Robinson, Jason Fitz, C-Rob. I think I'm going to spend the whole hour retelling this story, but I just want to paint a quick picture for you, all right? Because I'm sitting at dinner Friday night. I'm sitting out with some buddies, just a normal Friday night dinner, and I don't have my phone out because I'm being a good friend. I'm being real attentive during the dinner, right? And all of a sudden, 3 people sitting across me, around me at this booth, all just look down at their phones, and they all look at me and they go, oh. I'm like, what? And that's when I get you might want to look at your phone, only to look at my phone and realize that Geno Smith was traded to the Raiders, which is not the crux of today's show. I say that because C-Rob, last week, Friday, just willy-nilly, end of a segment, C-Rob's like, how would you... Just let me ask, how would you feel about Geno Smith as your quarterback, hypothetically, and Sam Darnold at the Seahawks? C-Rob, on behalf of America, when you're telling me something, I'm stupid. I'm pretty not smart, man. When you're telling me something, just tell me. Couldn't you just told me last Friday that Geno was going to be my quarterback by the end of the night? Come on, man.
You got to read what I write. I mean, because this was like 2 days after I wrote it. Now it was buried in a story about Sam Darnold, but yeah, I mean, this was, I had written on Wednesday, the previous Wednesday, that there were people telling me that they wanted to trade for Geno Smith. And I mean, I didn't know if it was actually going to come together, but that's what we ended up discussing, right, on the podcast. Like, is there this mystery team, and what if it's Seattle for Sam Darnold? And obviously that unfolded. So that was nice to see that happen. And I feel like when Darnold signed with the Seahawks, I tweeted like, maybe, and then I slotted all the quarterbacks, and so far I've hit all of them. Fields with the Jets. I hit Daniel Jones with the Colts. Who else slotted that I also hit? There's another quarterback that I'm not thinking of right now.
What about Aaron Rodgers? Where'd you have him? I can't remember.
I slotted Rodgers with the Steelers, and yeah, that one's going to be wild. Like, I'm telling you right now, and by the time people hear this, it might be over and done with. But what's crazy with that is, if Rodgers goes to the Giants, I think Russell Wilson's in a little bit of trouble. His market, I don't think, is robust out there. Like, he's certainly, they're going to be looking for a suitor. And it was interesting to me because on Monday, a report came out that the Titans are going to be interested in Russell Wilson. My phone rings. Titans are not interested in Russell Wilson. And I'm like hard? Like, is this pretty, like, you know, like, and I'm like, all right. So I ended up tweeting last night that, you know, I don't get the sense that the Titans are interested in Russell Wilson. I think a little bit of what's going on is the people in Russ's corner got to create a market for him.
Got to create something. Yep.
Yeah. Because I don't think, look, the Steelers, I don't want to say that he absolutely can't end up back with the Steelers. Let's say Rodgers goes to the Giants. I don't want to say Russ can't end up back in the Steelers, but I'm telling you right now, there are people in the building that do not want to have Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback in 2025.
Real quick,
why?
Let me do the chaos theory real quick, because I think the most obvious fit right here with all the puzzle pieces is, all right, fine, Rodgers goes to the Steelers and Russ goes to the Giants, I guess, and whatever. The chaos theory is, if, like you said, if Rodgers goes to the Giants, who is the Steelers starting quarterback week 1? Who? Like, we talked about this. I said this a million times over the past few months. We're going to get to the end of musical chairs, and there's going to be a team or two where we're like, oh my goodness, that's their quarterback week 1. It might be the Steelers. Like, who could they go to at that point? Who would they go to?
Kirk Cousins is still out there. And here's the thing about Cousins.
But the Falcons have kind of played this smart, by the way. Falcons have kind of played this smart.
Listen, okay, Cousins, if and when he's released by the Falcons, which I got to believe that they're not serious. He's not going to be I can't imagine, $40 million plus backup.
Okay, but at the same time, they've held on to it. And I think, for as much as I've kind of made fun of them, they've kind of played the smart, because let's say the Steelers have nobody. There's nobody left at the bar. It's closing time. Got to find somebody to go home with.
You think it's a
don't
trade
you have
situation?
to pick up the phone? Like, don't you have to pick up the phone to the Falcons, right?
I mean, theoretically, yes. And I will say this. If that's what's happening right now, if the Falcons are calculating this and they're going, there's going to be a team, particularly if Aaron Rodgers signs with the Giants, there's going to be a very, very desperate Pittsburgh team that's sitting there saying, where's our starting quarterback here? What's interesting, though, I think that would actually set up better for Kirk if he was traded from Atlanta to Pittsburgh, if that was something to develop. Because I think if Kirk gets cut, which is what everybody expects is ultimately going to happen, I think what he will want to do, and it's going to be hard to do this, but I do think he will want to wait until potentially after the NFL draft. Because I don't think Kirk Cousins wants to walk into another situation where it's like, okay, like,
third straight team to say, sorry, Kirk, here's a guy behind you. Yeah,
exactly. Like I think he would rather know, let's wait, let the draft play out, find out who selected quarterbacks. And now let's look at the landscape and see what's available for me to go and actually, carve out the remainder of my career.
Absolutely.
So the Steelers could be waiting if they really, and I'm telling you, there's some individuals in that building that really, after the Russ experience last year, I think, I think there were some coaching frustrations with him. I think there were some physical limitations, especially down the stretch, that became extremely clear.
Yep.
When he's getting hit and he's moving around, it is a hard fade from Russ. And so, again, but I'm with you. I sit there and I look at it and I'm like, what if there is no other option?
There might be no other option. But let me ask you a question too. This piggybacks on my second question. Let's say the Steelers, unless they just do the shotgun wedding, fine, we got to take Russ back. Whatever their plan B is, do you think Russ is just done in the NFL? Like, would he accept a backup job somewhere? I mean, you said the Titans are a hard no. If Aaron Rodgers signs with the Giants, would Russ go to like Minnesota? Because they need a backup, I assume, because J.J. McCarthy, we just don't know about his health. Is Russ just done at that point? Like, is there a scenario where Russ just never plays in the NFL again?
There's definitely not great options. And we do see quarterbacks get to this point where...
do you think he'd take a backup job? I guess that's a better question.
I can't, I don't know Russ, so I can't answer that. I can't answer that. I don't want to say, I don't want to say, no, there's absolutely no way he'd take a backup job because I don't know what that backup job looks like. Like, is it a backup job where clearly he could potentially compete and eventually take over the starting position? Then maybe that's a different, calculus than going into a place where you absolutely know the guy in front of you is the hammerlock starter and you're not going to get any kind of a shot. But we do see this happen with quarterbacks. I remember Ryan Tannehill, right? All of a sudden the market dried up and there were no opportunities for Ryan Tannehill. And the thought process was like, well, eventually somebody's going to call him. Somebody's going to call him to be a backup. Yeah. Somebody's going to call him to do this. Somebody's going to call him to do that. And then it was over. And then a year later, it's like, do you think there's any shot that Tannehill, gets a shot after a year off? And it's just a flat no. No, it's done. We're moving on. And I think, are we there yet for Russ? I don't want to say we're there yet because clearly the Giants, if Aaron Rodgers goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think then Russ is that choice for the Giants.
Okay.
But I also think that's predicated on the New York Giants sitting there and going, we can't get to one. Like, maybe Tennessee is going to take Cam Ward. We're not going to have an opportunity to throw everything at that pick and go and select that player. So it's, to me, as the quarterback dominoes have fallen, it's become very interesting to, like, Russ has become a very big story because it's like, where does he end up? Maybe Cleveland, right? Like, here's the thing about Cleveland, I will say. You deal for Kenny Pickett.
That doesn't matter.
Like, it wasn't right. You're not dealing for him to become a starter. You're dealing for him saying, okay, this guy was once a first-round pick. There's a potential that when he's with Pittsburgh, if you're Andrew Berry, the Browns general manager, you're saying, I don't know how jacked up things were in that organization at that point. Maybe he does have more talent than other people realize. And even if he doesn't, he's an experienced, backup.
Actually, I thought Kenny looked pretty good last year with the Eagles.
Okay,
like, so the little time we saw him preseason and late season. Yeah,
they're not done there. Okay, I will tell you that the Browns aren't finished. And I'm not even saying that they're going to draft a quarterback at number 2. They're going to add another player to the mix there. And I would tend to think at this point it's possibly a veteran player. So that, could that be a spot for Russ? Yeah, maybe. But I also think that's a spot that could be the Kirk Cousins destination eventually too, because Kirk Cousins isn't going to be, if they don't draft a quarterback, he's not going to sit there and go, well, geez, man, I don't want to play in front of Kenny Pickett. No, he'll go there and play in front of Kenny Pickett. So it's just thinning for us, man. We're going to find out whether Russ has got a career left.
But y'all, like, doesn't it have to mean something at some point that a competent version of the Seahawks and Pete Carroll gave up on Russ, and then Sean Payton, who is widely regarded as a genius, gives up on Russ, and then Mike Tomlin gives up on Russ. Like, these aren't poorly run organizations with
maybe
idiot
3 Hall of Fame
organizations
coaches in a row.
You've got 3 of the best coaches in the NFL that turn around and say, no, we're good. And the Raiders, frankly, could have had Russ if they wanted him, right? So even now they look around, the second chance at Pete Carroll. He looks around and says, nah, I'm all set. Like, this just comes back to, at some point, some guys are just washed.
Yeah.
Like, respected guys giving up on him means something to me.
And that's a great point, Fitz, because Pete Carroll said no twice, right? He's sitting there with the Raiders, and they could have gone out and signed him for nothing. And instead, he's like, no, my culture guy was the guy I loved in Seattle, the guy who I wanted to be our starting quarterback, and why we separated from Russ when we did was because I believed in Geno Smith. I'll never forget that. I couldn't believe when they traded Russ to Denver. I remember talking to somebody inside the Seahawks building, and I was like, so, like, where are you going with this? Because it's like, come on, realistically, is Geno going to be your starting quarterback? He's like, yeah, they love him. The locker room loves him. Pete loves him. Like, hard worker, comes in, everybody gravitates toward him, has ability. And I thought, come on, man. And then he went out and did what he did. And I was like, damn, I was wrong on this one. Holy cow. And as you said, Fitz, once again, Pete leaves. He gets his opportunity. He goes, no, I'm going to go get the other guy again. Like, I don't have any interest in Russ. And by the way, it's not just Pete passing on him. It's Tom Brady too. Brady's involved. He's in the middle of that stuff. He knows Russ. There's a relationship there. So yeah, I think that is meaningful. But as we know, really, once we get to the nitty gritty and it's desperation time, and you're sitting there, you're going, we could go get Flacco, or we could get Russ.
Oh,
I mean, some teams might opt for Flacco at this point.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Oh boy. This is again. I need to reiterate this. There are going to be some week 1 starting quarterbacks that are just like, like this is what you're going into the season with. The desperation level of some of these teams is going to be off the charts. Like, it's bad. And that speaks to Russ. Like, that nobody really wants Russ, even though there's some teams that literally have no plan A, B, or C right now.
What is Aaron Rodgers like? Why would Aaron Rodgers ever pick the Giants if the Steelers want him? The situation with Pittsburgh looks so much better.
I mean, in terms of like wins and losses, like his relationship with Tomlin, I think he has a lot of respect for Tomlin. I think that's mutual. Pittsburgh makes a lot of sense. I will say this, like, he's at the end here, and this is like a lot of moves. Like, this is a lot of, and he has a home in New York. Like, he literally would not need to do anything in terms of changing his life. He just stays where he is now, and he just goes to a different practice facility in the same stadium that he's been going to in New York. And I know people are like, well, come on, why would you choose? I'm with you. I understand that. I sit there and I stare at the two situations, especially after the Steelers acquired DK Metcalf, and knowing the defensive talent they have, knowing Mike Tomlin's history, I would love to see him really go to Pittsburgh. And I truly mean that. I would actually like to see if Aaron Rodgers' 2024 season was more just a function of, it's coming back from the Achilles. Really, let's get 2 years removed from the Achilles injury. I kind of feel that way about Kirk,
he was good
too.
in the second half. He was legitimately good in the second half of the season.
He did play better down the stretch.
Last 10 games, 18 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 97 passer rating. I'm not saying he's winning another MVP or anything, but he's better than a lot of these guys out there. Like, he's competent. Like, if you're the Steelers and you land Aaron Rodgers, you'd be like, all right, like, we can get another year out of him. Like you said, another year removed from Achilles. I could buy into that.
Yeah, okay, I expect, by the way, I think I'm very, very curious to see what they end up doing with that first round pick, because obviously they've shipped their second round pick. Hearing they are working hard on running backs. And, I think a guy like, what's today? Okay, it's March 11th. I'll go ahead and roll this one out there. I think when Quinshawn Judkins ran like 4.42, they were like, oh my God. like this dude is 220 plus. Runs hard as hell, loves contact, beats the crap out of teams. And, oh, man, we thought he was going to run in the mid 4.5s, maybe even late 4.5s. And he comes out and he runs a 4.42. Like, that's the Ole Miss Quinshawn Judkins. That's the guy who was supposed to be RB1 in a draft. I'll be damned if I think about how Quinshawn Judkins plays and how historically, Pittsburgh has liked to run the football with physical backs. He would fit I mean, he'd be a brilliant fit
because they don't have a second, like you said.
Yeah, I know. It's rich, right? It feels
it's
rich.
A rich price.
It feels rich, but I don't. It's a hell of a fit, and being that they don't have a second round pick, being that there's a potential that the Raiders break the seal on the running back market and take Ashton Genty, who I would love to see in a Chip Kelly offense. If Genty comes off at 6, I'm telling you right now, look at this, getting into draft talk on a Tuesday. But if Genty goes off at 6, teams are going to get antsy, because I think part of the reason why the running back market is so slow in free agency right now is they're like, man, there's a ton of depth here. All these guys are running fast. You can get big ones, you can get pass catchers, there's versatility in the class, but they also all know, like, how early is this run going to start? Because they're thinking maybe we can get our guy in the second round, late second round or whatever. If Genty goes off at 6, I don't know, man. Things can change a little faster than anyone realized. And Judkins is definitely a guy whose name after the combine, I think people were shocked that he ran a 4.42 at the size and physicality of the kind of player he is. And a lot of people like that talent. And he's the one that I think we could be sitting there. I'll help Fitz here, shooting our draft show and shocked that Judkins comes off in the first round.
So looking at the carousel, we got Geno to the Raiders. We got Sam Darnold to Seattle for 3 years, $105 million. Justin Fields to the Jets, 2 years, $40 million. Daniel Jones now to the Colts, 1 year, $14 million. When we look at that carousel, I did not say the word Titans. So let's stick with the draft thing for a second, because I would have presumed that a bridge gap quarterback of some sort coming in, not named Will Levis, would be an indication that maybe the Titans weren't sold on Cam Ward. The fact that they have done nothing at the quarterback position, C-Rob, does that mean that it's time for us to start maybe inferring that the Titans are going to stick at 1 and take the top quarterback on the board?
And you go out and you sign an offensive tackle, right? You're working
big money too.
Big money, and you're working on your line, right? And I think if you're the Titans, one of the elements I'm interested in is I do think they're still going through their process with Cam Ward. I truly do. I don't think this is like finished. However, that said, I think they look at what Jaden Daniels was able to do with the Washington Commanders. And I'm not saying that Cam Ward is Jaden Daniels, but people probably undersell that this guy, went from, incarnate word to Washington State to Miami, got better every single stop. Every team was better. His game got better, especially at Miami. He does have the best arm. He does have the best ability to play off script. He does all the arm angle stuff. He energized that Miami program. And so I think if you're sitting there and you're the Titans and you're saying, okay, we can wait on the quarterback. Maybe we can go back to the Will Levis experience, which I don't think there's confidence that that's going to work. What guarantee is there in the 2026 draft that you're going to feel any better about any of those quarterbacks, right? And now you're 2 years from now, you're Brian Callahan, and you're like, how many years am I going to do this and not have something and not resolve something here? So the fact that they invested on that offensive line as heavily as they did, which I kind of expected, but to me, I took it as a signal. This plays a little more into them going and getting a young player, and it really, in my mind, played into it. Up until I talked to someone about Russ and the Titans, I wasn't sure that Ward was necessarily the guy at number 1 with the Titans. After that conversation, I was like, uh-oh, like I better just start rethinking this here. Like they clearly are not going out to get an old guy to plug him in there and try to play that patchwork game. This feels like they really want to get a young guy, and they're positioned to get the one young guy everybody agrees is head and shoulders above the rest of the class.
With the carousel, let me ask you real quick, because I want to switch, because I do want to get to the Sam Darnold Seahawks thing. I think it's fascinating. I think what the Seahawks have done, just saying, okay, we're going to trade Geno and we're going to trade DK Metcalf because we're not going to pay him, and then we're going to bring in Sam Darnold, because we've talked so much about Sam Darnold. And I also, this is a Vikings thing too, of, hey, yeah, we have confidence in JJ McCarthy, and we're going to pour a ton of resources into the offensive line and re-sign Aaron Jones to help him out. What do you think of kind of that carousel. What do you think of the Seahawks moves? What do you think of the Vikings moves? Because I like both, actually. I think the Seahawks did pretty well for themselves, and I think the Vikings, now that you see the final product, what their plan was, I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me.
Well, the Vikings, first off, you knew when you would talk to people there about like, well, what's the calculus here in terms of not keeping Sam Darnold under the franchise tag? Well, the calculus was it's $40 million we're locking up on our cap this year. And, we kind of got plans. We have some guys we want to not only extend, but we're going to target some people in free agency. Now we've seen, they're actually, gangbusters. I'd be a little nervous if I'm the Detroit Lions, because I'm sitting there looking at Minnesota going, whoa, they are making some heavy hitting additions on defense.
Yep.
It's just what they have done with money already in this short period of time. I feel like they've added and gotten a heck of a lot better. Jonathan Allen, the Hargrave signing. It's going to be a playing against that defensive line in Minnesota next season. Yep. So I really like that. Now I understand that's why you wanted this money to play with, because you saw a path to improving a large portion of your roster, which they have done. And then for the Seahawks, to me, what was intriguing is I sit there and I go, okay, man, Tyler Lockett's gone. DK Metcalf's gone. Jackson Smith and Jigba's coming into his own, no doubt about that.
He's
to me, a target monster next year. Definitely draft that guy.
Oh, my goodness, 190 targets off the bus, yep.
I would presume they might take a stab at like a second wave, older free agent wideout and then draft a guy. So I would stare long and hard at the Seahawks first and second round picks and definitely look at what's the wide receiver that's potentially there. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Again, let's call this on March 11th that the Seahawks are going to look at a wide receiver early in the draft. But the biggest thing to me was when I saw you sit there and I'm like, let me see what this contract looks like with Darnold, right? Number one, clearly his market was soft, as we said, because you end up with a contract that averages low 30s, right? AAV. Mm-hmm. $55 million in guarantees. As soon as I saw $55 million in guarantees, I'm like, it's kind of a 1 year deal. It's a 2 year deal, but it's kind of a 1 year deal. And what I mean by that is 55 million guarantees is definitely a 2 year deal. However, if it absolutely implodes in year one and it is, you like go off a cliff and you sit there and you go, oh my God, we're the Houston Texans. We brought in Brock Osweiler and he is terrible. We have to get rid of this guy immediately. You're not going to be in salary cap hell, right? You're going to take a hit, absolutely. Yep. There's no doubt you're going to take a cap
first hit. Yeah, you're fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be Kirk Cousins where you're sitting there going, oh my God, we guaranteed $100 million to this guy and we actually have to pay this out. It's not going to be Russell Wilson where you're like, we guaranteed the moon, and it's not going to be the Cleveland Browns going, we guaranteed the universe. What the hell are we doing here? No, I think they took the half measure, which is we went out there, we got this guy, we're changing these things. It's a low AAV, especially for a guy if he plays to his ceiling like he did in Minnesota, we're getting him on a bargain. And if it just goes off a cliff, we didn't guarantee so much money that we couldn't pull the plug on this going into 2026. And as Frank said, designated a post-June 1st cut, split whatever the remaining cap hit is over 2 years. You can wiggle out of that contract pretty quickly. And I think that's something you would only consider if, let's say, we're talking epically bad. Let's say they go 4-13 and Sam is just his worst version of himself. The guy he was in the
last two games.
Yeah, the worst version of himself, right? And then you have a top pick and Arch Manning declares, right? Or Drew Aller blows it up at Penn State. Or you have a couple of these quarterbacks come out of the ether in the 2025 college season and you go, okay, well, this didn't work. Let's pivot fast to now what we have in front of us. They gave themselves options, which is what I really like. They gave themselves some flexibility.
Real quick, two things on the Seahawks and the Vikings. First, with the Seahawks, the only thing I really worry about is the fit with Sam Darnold and the Seahawks, because what's the weakness of the Seahawks right now? It's their interior offensive line. And Sam Darnold just doesn't work well under pressure. We saw that in the last two games. Nate Tice's talked about this often where, hey, look at that line in front of him those last two games. That was the reason Sam Darnold looked as bad as he did. Is that a good match? And that's where the draft is so crucial for them. Now they have these extra picks, right? You got to figure out receiver and you got to figure out interior offensive line. That's not easy. Free agency's still out there too. You can get a stopgap guy there. With Minnesota, while I like what they did, let's not act like there's no risk with J.J. McCarthy either. Yes, he was a 10th pick. He also has had multiple now knee procedures. He has not played other than a half of preseason football. I get it. I like it. I give the stamp of approval on what they did, but there's a way that goes poorly too. I just think both have risk, but ultimately at the end of the day, I see the vision from Schneider and Kwesi and say, okay, I get it. And that both of these plans make sense for me, even if there's risk involved.
Yeah. And the risk absolutely circled around both of those quarterbacks. I mean, let's see what JJ, we don't know with JJ. We have no clue
idea.
what's going to happen with JJ McCarthy. And what they're able to do is very much going to be a function of how far he can come along quickly in year 2, where he's at physically coming off of those injuries. So of course the element of risk is definitely there. And I think that's why you still sit there and consider, is there another mid-level veteran, a solid backup we can add?
You almost have to, right?
Yeah, I think you have to.
Right?
I think you sort.
But who is it? Like, I don't know.
I don't know.
Are you really going to do is Kirk Cousins? Like, that'd be weird.
No.
Aaron Rodgers isn't going to go do that. And it's not going to be a big name. It's going to be.
Is it
Flacco? Be a bad veteran.
Flacco? Is it
comes back to Flacco?
Here's my thing about
always
Flacco.
Comes back to Flacco.
Here's the thing about Flacco, though. I would not, because Flacco's not and this is not a dig on him. Flacco's not a good support backup. Flacco, going in there, he's like, "Hey man, I want to start." That's how he's going to be. He wants to walk in there, he's going to start, right?
Yeah.
Which is
they need
why
their Andy Dalton is what they need. They need a guy. It's
exactly.
I'm good being here. I'm cool.
Absolutely, and that might, they need an Andy Dalton. And when you sit there and you look at it, from a perspective of the Seahawks, the risk there to me, as you said, look, the line's got to be, you have to dedicate some attention to the line to make sure that you resolve that. They've got the ability to run the football and protect him, which is great. You're going to have to add to the wideout situation. The one plus, though, that he walks into is Clint Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. And this was the passing game coordinator when Sam really, if you want to draw where he turned his career around, it was when he made the stop in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And they cut Trey Lance and they said, or they traded Trey Lance to the Cowboys. They said, we're going to roll Sam as our backup. We feel really good about where he's at. We feel great about how he's picked up this offense. And he and Clint Kubiak worked very, very closely together that entire season. And I would argue that helped get him on the rails and ready to go with the Minnesota Vikings. It's definitely why the Vikings signed him to the deal that they did and thought this guy could potentially come in here and start for us because of conversations that Kevin O'Connell had with Clint Kubiak. So I do think that's a big positive for him. But yeah, I mean, there's risks on both sides, and there's still time, I think, to try to work through some of these things. And I actually still think we're not entirely sure who could come available down the line for any of these teams. I'll give you an example. I think the New England Patriots, they would love to see if someone will bite on Joe Milton, right? Yeah. I think they would have, because
that was when they signed Dobbs, if I remember, I think they signed Dobbs. So there's been a million moves the last 24 hours. Yeah. It was like, they must be trading Joe.
Who by the way,
Josh
Dobbs, one of the top 2 or 3 support quarterbacks in the league. He's going to be unbelievably good for Drake May. They're going to be. I mean, he will. Yeah,
he's a great
hyper.
If you can get something for Milton, for sure. Yeah,
it will be great. So but then now you sit there and you go, okay, Joe Milton's got a little bit of tape. It was pretty good. It was fun to watch.
Really good.
Big arm. Yeah. Athlete, can move around. What happens is teams go back to their college analysis on him and they go, okay, played an unconventional offense at Tennessee, unbelievable arm, but super simple offense and a weird offense, like a weird offense that doesn't translate well. Now we're going to look at what he did with the Patriots. I'll say this, what he did with the Patriots, his off-script stuff was great. It was fun to watch. And he produced and broke defenses by having a strong arm and an ability to move around. Teams could not get him down. You can't play like that on the NFL level consistently. And I think that's what teams would be worried about. They're like, this isn't a scheme. He's not out there running a scheme. He's out there doing Joe Milton. He's out there going, look at my athleticism, look at my arm, look at my ability to make plays happen. That only lasts for so long. Either you get killed because you get destroyed running around, or eventually defenses figure it out and they go, okay, well, here are the disguises he can't handle. So let's just throw all these disguises at him, and eventually he's going to make mistakes. He's going to have turnovers, and then it backslides really quickly. Right now, the Patriots are like, we might be able to get something out of this guy. And when I say get something, it'd have to be pretty high. You'd be surprised. I mean, I think
so too, because
why? Like, second round pick out of him.
You just drafted him, I think, with a 5th, right? Like he's a 5th. So why trade him for a 4th? Like, what's the point?
No.
Like,
I don't think
you need a lot more, but our team's going to be like, yeah, we'll trade you a 2nd. Like that seems crazy to me. So like, I don't know. It's going to be very hard to actually execute a trade here. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you don't know, if you like Joe Milton's tape in the pros and you don't know if you like any of these guys, you want to take a developmental guy to work on long term, could be worth a 3rd rounder. I mean, you never know. If you're sitting there 3rd round and saying, got to get somebody in here that we're developing for the future, it could be Milton.
Joe Milton, I'd have a hard time convincing you. You'd have a hard time convincing me that what little tape he had, what I saw wasn't as good as anything Anthony Richardson's done.
I was going to say Joe Milton is what Anthony Richardson was supposed to be. I hate to say it.
No.
Yeah,
he's definitely a better passer. Okay, point blank. I think he can. I think his arm is stronger. Joe Milton's arm. I remember when he was coming out. I was at the combine, and I'm having lunch with an executive, and we're talking about guys in the draft, and Richardson had gone off high the year before, and I said, is there a chance Milton is like this guy who like people freak out about, and he flies up the board because of the physical traits? He's like, no, he kind of laid out what all the problems were, and he's like, he's going to end up being kind of middle round guy at best. Okay, but he did say, however, his arm is probably better than Josh Allen's. And I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, no, his arm is the most unbelievable arm I've ever seen. And this is a guy who's got a couple decades of, like, he was like, this is like Jamarcus Russell arm. He's like, it's approaching that level of an arm where you're like, I'll never see this, ever again in my life.
Now you've got me salivating over Joe Milton. When Joe Milton gets traded on draft night, I'm going to cut it back to this show. All right, we're going to take a quick break. It's not just quarterbacks. There's a lot of spending going on. Who's getting it right? Who isn't? We'll break it down after a quick break. Okay, so the day one of free agency, big spenders. Everybody's out there throwing money around like you get a car and you get a car. It's a full Oprah Winfrey taping, right? So everybody's throwing cash out to everybody. A lot of big money going out there. A lot of big transactions. We're going to go through some of the winners here. I'll go first here on one that stood out to me. One thing that did stand out, because you mentioned Minnesota spending. I just want to point out, to me, Mike Tannenbaum said on ESPN last week, and I've known Mike for a long time. I thought it was a smart point. He said, you don't use your credit card unless you're in the Super Bowl window. And if you're in the Super Bowl window, that's when you use your credit card. You spend money, do whatever you have to. I think they did that with the offensive lineman pickup, 5 years, $88 million for Fries. Like, I look at that, and all I keep thinking about is Carolina boys. Because remember when Bryce was drafted, Bryce didn't look all that good. And they get the end of the first year, they look around, they're like, well, we need to get better on the interior of the offensive line so Bryce can actually develop. Back half of last year, Bryce was a pretty good quarterback, right? Like, I look at this the same way. If you're bracing for JJ to come in, the best thing you can do is make sure that every body in front of him, all the fat guys, are lined up and really good. So I thought that was a moment there where it speaks to what we've been talking about. Like, what's JJ going to be? I think Minnesota's done a really nice job with the money they spent. Particularly, I did like the offensive line signing.
Yeah, how about the Bears? What about that, too? I mean,
by the way, like you spoke of, real quick, we're talking about the Vikings, we're talking about the Bears. If I'm a Lions fan, I'm like, oh man, like, did our window close? Like, you just said, I look, they went 15-2 last year just because they lost they're going to get Aiden back, and I thought okay, go ahead. Okay,
let me make the argument here. I get this, right? Because I went through this. I'm looking at I was like, oh my God, the Bears just rebuilt the middle of their offensive line, right?
So did the Vikings.
They replaced the coach, right? They got the coach in there to work with monumentally talented second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams. Vikings, same deal. Rebuilt, took care of things on the offensive line, took care of things on the defensive line. I'm like, if you're a Lions fan, you're probably getting a little fidgety. And then I remembered, oh yeah, that's right. They went out and got DJ Reed, who, by the way,
is a great signing, by the way. A discount compared to the other corners.
Absolute discount. I'm like, this is an all-pro level corner. I like
that signing a lot.
That's a corner. I'm thinking 21 a year, 22. What did they get him at? I mean, wasn't it like 16? Yeah, it was like 16.
Yep. But he just replaces Carlton Davis. Like, it's not like,
but Carlton Davis didn't play.
Added.
No, but Carlton Davis didn't play in 2024, right, Frank? So in my mind, I sat there and I said, okay, they're re-upping most of their guys, like a number of their guys they re-signed, right, that they like. You add, to me, in my mind, 1 first-round pick proven in DJ Reed. That's how I look at it. That's like a first-round pick. You went out and signed a first-round pick, basically, who, by the way, is playing at an all-pro level. You add a defensive player of the year caliber player in Aiden Hutchinson, who comes back on the defensive line, right? So I'm like, I get it. And then on top of that, it's not like they don't still have money to spend. They do. But they also are sitting there going, all right, we got to be smart about this. So when we take our shots and we use the credit card, remember, we have to have enough of a credit line because we got Jahmyr Gibbs coming up. We got Sam Laporta coming up. We got Aiden Hutchinson coming up. We're already paying. We're already paying a bunch of guys as it is. So, they're thinking of the future. They're thinking of the now. And that's why I was okay with it. Because I was like, you know what? If you were only going to take a shot, if you told me Lions could take one shot in free agency, what would you want them to go get? I would have said, and especially knowing they were going to lose Carlton Davis, I would have said, go get the best corner you can possibly find in free agency. And I actually think they did that with DJ Reed. I love that. I think he's going to help Ennis Rakestraw. I think he's going to help Terry and Arnold. I think he's going to help the safeties. I mean, between him, if they can get Rakestraw and Arnold to take a step forward, you got Kirby Joseph, you got Brian Branch. The secondary could get really, really scary, really, really fast, especially if the defensive line stays healthy. Now I'm like, all right, they got to find another end somewhere. They need another complementary end to Aiden Hutchinson. And maybe that's where in the draft we will see them try to poke around in the first round or somewhere else. And
there's some guys down there. There's some guys down late in the first round that can help. Like it's a decent draft for edge rusher, so I can see that. I just wonder with the Lions. It's nothing they've done. It's that the rest of the division's gotten so much better.
It has.
This division's going to be unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like you have the Vikings if JJ McCarthy's legit. If he let's say he's Bo Nix, right? Like, let's say he's just at that level. I think the Vikings are just as good as they were last year when they started season 14-2. I think the Bears are a ton better, and you've taken Ben Johnson from the Lions.
But you still have the best offense.
Yep. Without your coordinator, though? Yeah. Without your coordinator.
Okay. I would say
that's not nothing. That's not nothing.
Listen, I would say that if the guys on the offense, all the guys on the offensive line are studs. They're all veterans. They're all in their prime. They're not up because the coordinator left, right? Jared Goff has his limitations, but he's not a rookie coordinator. He's not a young guy, right? Like he can handle losing a coordinator, I think, at this stage of his career, at least for the short term. The running backs. Come on. Montgomery, Gibbs, Laporta. Like, right? I think when I look at the offense,
they got dudes.
They got all the dudes.
There's no question.
So I'm less worried about now. I'm not saying Ben Johnson isn't a loss. He is a loss, but I'm less worried about, to me, with Detroit. I maintained it. I even talked to Dan Wetzel. Shout out to Dan Wetzel, former Yahoo Sports employee. Soon to be former Yahoo Sports employee.
We get him for another week or so.
Yeah, we get him for another week. But I talked to Dan Wetzel at the end of the season when they lost, and I'm like, man, I'm sitting there and I'm like, is the window closed already? And then I'm like, no, wait a minute. If they get guys healthy on defense and come back and they can go and address, they needed a corner horribly bad. If they can go and address it in a meaningful way, I think they're back. I think they're back up and running. I think they'll be all right. Division's better, though.
The division, that's the hardest part about it. It's just going to be hard. It's going to be hard to win a ton of games in this division against your division opponents. Like there is some level of, Chicago addressing the offensive line to me is so key again in the development of Caleb, right? Like if our argument is that Caleb holds the ball too long, well, let's give him an offensive line where he feels protected, doesn't have to run around as much and can make faster decisions, which is part of Ben Johnson's offense. Like it just feels like really smart strategic additions done by Chicago makes them drastically better. They were already good in some places. They're drastically better. So I feel like, yes, everybody, it's not that the Lions have taken any step back. It's just this division is going to be a gauntlet.
Right. It is. That's exactly how I feel. It's not that the Lions took a step back. Right? Although I do worry about the coordinators. Look, when you lose two great coordinators, so they might have been two of the top three head coaching candidates on this cycle. There's something to that, but roster-wise, yes. I don't have a problem with a team that went 15-2 last season and brings everybody back and adds DJ Reed. I do like that, but yeah, the rest of the division, my goodness. And again, we didn't even mention the Packers. Not that they haven't made a big splash, but they had the youngest roster in the NFL last year. I mean, the Packers ain't going anywhere either. It's just the NFC North is ridiculous right now.
So what about, let's stick in the NFC for a second. What about the Eagles? Like the Eagles have lost Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Isaiah Rodgers, Darius Slay expected, James Bradbury expected, CJ Gardner-Johnson traded. The Eagles have been gutted today over the course of the last 48-72. C-Rob, do we feel differently about Philly right now?
Look, yeah, absolutely. You lose all that talent. You should be nervous about it. I think the upside is they're prepared in a way that they're like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis they're coming. Like, this is it. Like, these are the guys that we're now rolling into that are going to be that dominating force for us up front. Brandon Graham could come back. Like, that guy's going to play forever.
He could be 70 years old. Man.
Yeah, he could potentially
5 sacks. Yeah.
come back. Yeah, he'll be getting 5 sacks at 70. I mean, but Brandon Graham's another guy that could come back. I think they feel like they have young guys who are ready to progress into those positions. The CJ Gardner-Johnson thing was hilarious because I'm here. I'm in Houston. They trade him. They get Kenyon Green back. And let me tell you something about him. He is talented. He's just frustrating as He is so frustrating. But the second I heard that trade, I'm like, man, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, they're going to send that guy. It's going to be Mekhi Becton all over again. He's going to go. Jeff Stoutland's going to get his hands on him. They're going to figure out exactly where he can play on their line. And he's going to end up being like it. Because when they got their hands on Becton, I'm like, man, really? Did they really think that they can get him to the point where he's playing quality? I mean, even if it's at guard, that he's really truly playing quality snaps and he stays healthy. And what happens? He plays quality snaps at guard. They win a Super Bowl and he's going to ultimately get a bag eventually in free agency this year. I think that means Becton's moving on from them. But it's just funny that even in the moves that they make where they're like, all right, we're surrendering talent. We're adjusting obviously the finances under our cap. They get a piece back in the process where I'm like, they'll take that fixer upper and they'll fix it. And it'll probably be better when they have their hands on it. And that'll be frustrating ultimately for the Houston Texans. But they lost a ton.
Can we talk about the Houston Texans? What are they doing? Like, it just seems like, hey, our offensive line was god awful last year. Let's just make it worse. Like, it doesn't get better getting rid of Laramie Tunsil. Like, I love that move for the Commanders. What are the Texans doing? They're leaving C.J. Stroud out there to dry.
Number one, they know they're going to have to sign Stroud to an extension. So I think monetarily, they're going to sign Stroud to an extension after year 3.
What? So they're going to have him laid up in the hospital? So
no,
but I mean, I'm just what?
Laramie did not have his best season. Okay, the left side of their line was not good last year. Okay, and I will agree, Laramie. And I even made the joke about, X is broken and it's so broken now that it's starting to tell me that the Texans traded Laramie Tunsil. I made that joke, but at the same time, I'm here, I'm in Houston. I know 2024 was not a banner year for him. And another thing too, I've probably mentioned it on the show in the past. I feel like every offseason, other than after Stroud's rookie year, for years, every offseason I'm hearing like, they might be willing to trade Laramie Tunsil. Like, it was always like, is he a culture fit? Is he as coachable as he needs to be? Does he show up and work hard every single day? Like, there were always all these questions about Laramie. And I'm like, when is this ever going to turn a corner? I thought it did after the first year of CJ Stroud. I was like, okay, he's locked in now. But I think as far as salary, production, the fact that D'Amico Ryans, when they're talking about, the team leaders and all these things, and he was a captain, D'Amico Ryans didn't really ever say much about Laramie Tunsil, which is a shocker, right? You would think ex-player definitely loves to shout out his guys, was never really shouting out Laramie Tunsil ever.
And I'm like, that's but you need somebody to play left tackle.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I am nervous for CJ Stroud. Too. Absolutely. I totally get where you're coming from. I am breathless with anticipation to see how exactly they're going to remedy this.
Hope there's a plan.
But it speaks, it speaks to the expectations we had. That, I mean, in the minds of many, Houston last year was meh, right? And they were 10-7 last year. Like, they're picking 25th in the draft. They were 10-7. So I do think that sometimes we got to pull back a little bit. Like, the Texans went from being so bad to being actually really good in first year of CJ. The second year, I think we wanted them to be Herculean. Like, they're still a 10-win football team trying to figure out how to better maximize what they have.
They'll want to
Fitz, game too. No, that they lost Tank Dell to an injury. They lost Stephon Diggs to an injury, right? Joe Mixon went down early in the year. They had everything go sideways on them. But let's be real. It was a really, really messy. You fired Bobby Slowick, who was just at the top of head coaching lists. Your OC, people have thought, if you'd asked me a year ago, where's Slowick going to be? in March of 2025. Like someone else is head coach. Right. Yeah. Not, I would have said not on the Texans because he took a job. Right. And he's fired. And so there's that. There's you're dumping elements of your offensive line, including an all-pro level tackle. That just goes to show you there's stuff going on inside that organization that we're probably not all fully understanding. And I think it is culture related. I think it is work related. I truly believe DeMeco Ryans looked at that situation, the problems they were having repetitively, particularly with the offensive line last year, and then schematically, some of the limitations that they had, especially after they lost Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. I think DeMeco Ryans is like, we need change. Like, I don't like the way the direction this is going, and he's going to hire who he's going to be comfortable with, which is how you get slow at going out the door.
Frank's like, man.
I get it.
Doesn't like this.
I guess the counter argument to what I'm saying is, oh my God, how could the Texans dismantle their offensive line? The offensive line was terrible. Like, what are you losing?
50, how many sacks? What is it, like 51 sacks? Well, he sacked 51 times.
It should have been more than that. Like, Stroud was under pressure. Look, I love CJ Stroud. I think he's a wonderful player. So maybe I'm just making excuses for him. But I chalk up most of his struggles last year to the fact that the offensive line could not block.
I agree.
I agree. Absolutely. But I just wonder, okay, that's fine. You got rid of a couple of linemen. You got rid of your offensive coordinator. What's the plan? How do you fix it? Like, I guess I'm a little impatient that way just because I want to see how the Texans are going to support CJ Stroud. And I don't have the answer to that right now.
If you had asked me last year, what the hell's going on with the Buffalo Bills? I was telling you, like, I don't know, man, it might be over. Like, I was like, I don't understand. Right. Like, I remember that. It was a total, it's chaos. And Sean McDermott's going to get fired, and Josh Allen's going to hit a brick wall, and he doesn't have anybody to throw to, and all these different things. And then by the time the season got around, they pulled it together because they're a good organization. That's the challenge right now for the Texans.
I don't know if Texans are a good organization.
That's what I'm saying. You have to showcase that now. Yeah, that's what this offseason's about. You're making massive changes. We're all doubting you. Now let's see if you can actually pull it together when it looks like there's an element of chaos and messiness, which there clearly is or was.
I'll just tell everybody to take a drink every time I say this for the rest of the year because I say it all the time. But think about what you've talked about. You just mentioned C.J. Stroud and how his offensive line failed him. We've talked about Sam Darnold and how we're worried about whether or not that offensive line is going to be good enough. We've talked about the Bears and the fact that they've been aggressive in addressing the offensive line. The Vikings spent a bunch of money to get better on the interior offensive line. Like, this is the bi-weekly reminder, I think, to everybody. Like, I don't think there are 32 great left tackles, guards, centers in the NFL. There just aren't. Go ahead, Zero.
And Fitz, what's crazy about this is whenever you talk to teams about their primary complaint about what's happening to football at the collegiate level, it's that they're like, we don't ever get ready offensive line anymore. They're like, none of them. So many of these guys don't know how to play with their hand on the ground, mauling. Like, it's such a work in progress. And I have had so many organizations tell me that the Philadelphia Eagles should take Jeff Stoutland, weigh him, and then pay him in that weight in diamonds because that's what he's worth. like that is how I had an AFC GM who was like, you have no idea the edge the Eagles have with him. Like, they're like, it's unbelievable, the edge. They're like, they have a guy who can create offensive linemen. Which is why I say them getting Kenyon Green.
Becton was a great example of that.
Becton was a wreck.
100%.
And then he goes there, and next thing you know, you're like, what the hell? This guy's he's a good really player now.
Last year,
yeah. And it's like, it's not like that talent didn't exist with the Jets, right? And this is what they do. They bring guys in, they coach them up, and Stoutland's he's just got the blueprint. And when you hear other organizations,
it's like Scarnecchia over the Patriots dynasty. He was the secret to the Patriots dynasty. Like, when you have a great offensive line coach, like, you could go places in the NFL.
Which is, again, when we're doing our draft broadcast that we're willing into existence, and Will Campbell is taken, or any of these tackles are taken, and you're bored with the pick because you can't go to social media and yell about a wide receiver or quarterback or whatever it is you want.
Jersey that night. Yeah.
Like, I realize you're not going to run out and buy that jersey, but you should. Like, if your team takes a fat guy, you should grab a little thing of confetti and just throw it in the air. Personal one-man confetti party for the fat guys.
I remember the draft when the Bengals passed on Penei Sewell. They took Jamar Chase, right? And then the Lions took Jamar Chase. the Lions took Penei Sewell, and it was like, yeah, he's really good. He's a really good offensive lineman from Oregon. Like, this is a really good player. And you're like, that changed so much about what the Lions were doing on their offensive line to have a guy of that level. Now, granted, those guys aren't available.
What happened to that
always.
Jamar Chase guy, though?
He turned out to be pretty good. Think about that. Like, what a decision. You're sitting there going, do we take Jamar Chase? Do we take Penei Sewell? You could have probably done either and been great. Yeah, you're totally fine. Either's a perennial all-pro. Either's the best that they're, near the best at their position. They're in the conversation. So, but yeah, I mean, that Fitz, it's a great reminder that if you have a coach who can actually turn, middling or struggling or talented players coming from college who just don't know how to play offensive, football on the line at the NFL level, you pay that coach, you keep them forever, you keep teams away from them forever, and you sink as much as you can in terms of draft assets. I think you sink into the offensive line from the top of the draft to the bottom of the draft, constantly searching for whatever remedy you can find.
Frank's age-old point, coaching staffs are not salary cap limited. Like, at this point, if I see an offensive line coach in the NFL that I think is better than everybody, I'll go hand him $20 million. I don't care. I'm worth billions. I'll just hand him, I'll outpay him. That's one thing. Speaking of outpaying, it leads to something. There's a learning lesson for free agency. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'll explain my theory when we come back. Okay, boys, hear me out, because I'm a fan of a team that sucks. And when you are a fan of a team that sucks, one of the arguments you make constantly is, oh my God, next year we have so much money to spend. Our team is going to get drastically better. And it really, this is an annual conversation, but it hit me again this year. The salary cap has become so huge. And so many teams end up with space. Instead of saying, my favorite team has $120 million, you got to look around the rest. If you're a Patriots fan, look around. Okay, my team has $40 million more than the next guy. When you start to actually do the math, I think fans, C-Rob, have lost their mind on the concept that we have all this money and we're going to turn our team around without acknowledging that the money's not really what you think it is and the talent's not really what you think it is, and it's not the right way to build your team.
Well, let me talk to Patriots fans for a second here, because honestly, nobody got screwed more than the Patriots with the salary cap. And what I mean by that is your tactical edge was that you were rolling into this offseason with more money than anybody else. You were going to have the ability to go suck up a bunch of free agents, with the Amex black card, right? But the salary cap had gone up so much last year and this year that you had these teams that are sitting there going, we have a ton of money. Let's just keep our guys. So they start they're Trey Smith. You just start seeing all these guys that start to get, re-signed by their franchises. Even franchises,
and also fearful of the unknown, Charles. By the way,
sure.
Maybe we don't love this guy, but if we let him go, there's nobody to replace him.
Nobody to replace him, right?
Good point.
But yeah, I mean, that's Zach Bond. I was like, Zach Bond. There's no way the Eagles can't keep Zach Bond. He's definitely gonna be out there. And I'm sitting there looking at the other teams that are going to chase after him. And then my phone dings and Zach Bond's got a contract extension with the Eagles. That's what happens when, you prepare to have this tactical edge, but circumstance it's a rug pull for you. Circumstance ends up taking that tactical edge and saying, actually it's not going to be as big an edge as you think. That's what happened when the salary cap boosted this offseason, and you saw a lot of teams go to work immediately saying, let's retain. And free agency, it was like every day I was like, oh, free agency just got a little worse. Just got a little worse.
Am I wrong that this was the thinnest free agency market? Because it feels like I say that every year in my head, but man, it was thin this year. That's how you get to the point of that's how you get to the point of Milton Williams making $26 million a year. I like Milton Williams a lot. I think he's a good player. There ain't no way in heck he's worth $26 million, really. I guess he is because the Patriots paid him, so you're worth whatever anybody's going to pay you. But Milton Williams, $26 million a year, because the Patriots sitting there saying, whoa, well, okay, we can't pay T. Higgins. We can't even pay Chris Godwin.
And you have to overpay to get people to come to your organization.
Exactly.
It's just such a, look, let's be honest. You guys, the writers, you're going to do this. Like, there's going to be written article after written article about the best free agents in next year's class. We do this, and then everybody starts reading through the list, and they're like, "Oh my God, look at all these amazing names, and look at how much money we spent."
To Washington.
Like, and then you sit there and say, "Well, wait a minute, guys. By the time this all sorts itself out, the top third of these free agents are all going to end up back where they were. The money is going to be far more equal than you think it is right now, or the amount extra that you have won't make a difference because everybody will keep their own. And at the end of the day, you're going to have the decision of if you want to overpay for mediocrity, which is 99% of what we're seeing over the course of the last 72 hours. Like, you're overpaying for pretty good. So it's just a reminder, like, the way you build is long-term through the draft. You got to hit on your draft picks over and over and over again, and then you got to use the money to retain your own in advance. Like, that's where the money has to go.
I want to be careful too. I'm the one to introduce the word, overpaying, but with the salary cap's jumping because of the rights deal that they worked out, right? Because of all these other revenue streams that they have right now that are pumping money into the NFL. It's the Mississippi River. It's not like streams. It's not tributaries. Like, this is a full force. Like, I mean, this is a 5 mile wide river of money going into the NFL right now. And guess what? They're going to add an 18th game. And then when they add that 18th game, they're going to redo their rights deals. They're going to opt out of their rights deals. They're going to redo the rights deals. Now that's a few years away, but after they redo those rights deals, we're going to have a $500 million salary cap. Okay. And we're going to be sitting there.
We're going to get that high.
Absolutely.
Really? That's like doubling up. Wow.
Absolutely. There's no question. If they're able to expand their television rights deal on like the scale the NBA did, we're talking about, an astronomical amount of money. And by the way, it's not just domestic anymore. They're working hard overseas and with that international package to groom a whole other continent of fans so that they can sell that rights deal down the line. So that with 18 games, they can recreate an entire NFL season in the aggregate by having 16 games, over in Europe and the UK and in Mexico. And I mean, it is banging. And I say overpaid, but I'm like, it's not overpaid because this is how much money the NFL is making. And I don't know what the tipping point is. I don't know what the thing is. It was years ago that, Mark Cuban was pissed off because, NFL teams are talking about playing on Christmas. He said, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I'm like, I remember that quote. I'm like, ain't nobody caught them yet to slaughter. They are the fastest hogs, most steroided out hogs we've ever seen. Like, you're not slaughtering that hog. That hog just gets bigger and meaner and eats up more real estate. I don't know what'll ever change that. Like, we keep thinking there's something.
One thing that needs to change is the franchise tag. The franchise tag needs to change. It was never meant for this. It was never meant for every single team to use it once a year. It was meant to keep quarterbacks where they were. That's 1993. That's what it was meant to do.
It's irrelevant anyway because the franchise tag numbers have gotten so crazy that teams. I mean, it's not like how many guys got tagged this year? 2. Like,
I guess that's true.
They're not going to use the franchise tag anymore because it'll have obliterated itself. You're not going to, pretty soon the franchise tag for quarterbacks is going to be $60 million. And you're going to go,
you're not wrong.
I'm not going to use that. The wide receiver franchise tag is going to be 40. The defensive end franchise tag is going to be 40. Like, we're only a couple of years removed from that. And once that happens, teams just aren't going to use those tags anymore. And the players, when you go through these CBA negotiations, we all think, we think it's important because high-level players and agents about it. They're like, oh, this sucks. This is the worst thing. It's ridiculous. It's restrictive. It puts careers in jeopardy, all these different things. And then it affects, at maximum, like, let's say a year where a ton of guys get tagged, 12 guys. Right. Well, you know how many players there are in the NFL? And when the player reps go out and they say, what do you want? They talk about all these things. They never get to the franchise tag because the vast majority, 99.8% of the membership or 99% of the membership sits there and goes, I'm never getting tagged. That don't mean nothing to me.
Me at all.
Yeah,
and it's not even a worse thing. Like
I want better
Higgins gets
healthcare.
it twice. Higgins has done pretty well for himself on tag. Like
you listen, you play through it a couple of times.
Yeah.
But Kirk Cousins, you want to talk about when Kirk Cousins retires and why that guy's going to be wealthy as hell? It's because of the two franchise tags that really amplified his pay early in his career and put him on a trajectory where, especially for quarterbacks, once you make that franchise tag money, if you're a good player, you never make less than that. Which that's another thing with Darnold. That's a good point that I didn't really see anybody make with Darnold was, say the Vikings are sitting there and they're going, maybe we really do want to potentially work out a long-term deal with Sam Darnold. Maybe we want to get him back for 2 years. If you tag him with the intent of working out like a 2-year deal with Sam Darnold, your number is starting at $40 million. Like you've now said, hey, automatically AAV is right at the tag number, so $40+ million. Vikings do that. They're like, yeah, we'd love to maybe do a deal with them, but we can't start at that number. Like that's crazy.
Fair.
I think to me, the more I look at the franchise tag process and the salary cap, I should say, the more I look at the salary cap process, the more I just think it's like internet dating. It looks one way, and then when you actually get there, it looks totally different. Like it's for everybody that's sitting here looking at free agents for next year and how much cap space you have in 3 years, just stop. It's all going to be irrelevant by the time you actually get to the day of the action. Not irrelevant enough to stop reading the pieces, though, when the guys write them about the upcoming free agents. Keep doing that. It's like a drug. We have to do it. All right. Follow us on social media. You know that, at Frank Schwab, at Charles Robinson, at Jason Fitz. We're actually at Yahoo Schwab. I don't know why I put Frank Schwab.
Company man, Fitz. Don't forget
You're the only person that lost your first name in that process. Rate, review, subscribe. We appreciate it. As always, we appreciate Feisty Fridays coming to, what are we going to call these, Wild Wednesdays? I don't know. But fun to have everybody together on a Wednesday. We will be back on Friday with even more for you. It's Tuesday, though, so I don't even know what the hell day it is.
I wasn't going to stop you, but I'm like, wait, am I wrong?
What is this? What is this then? I can't think of anything alliterative with Tuesday. So Feisty Fridays
when you live in Las Vegas, man. You
just lose sense of time.
What day of the week? I don't even know where I am.
What day is it?
I don't know where. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and figure out what day of the week it is. In the meantime, thanks for hanging out with us. Come back Friday. I do know we'll be back then, and we'll be back for the NFL draft. We'll just keep saying that. We appreciate you hanging out with us.